I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum. Welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and we're looking back at John Carpenter's depressingly pertinent social commentary on the dangers of consumerism, a movie that shines a light on the questionable foreign policy of Western superpowers, a movie about fake news, misinformation, and a dystopian future that we might well be living through right now, actually. But then it's also a movie with one of the greatest fight scenes ever committed to film, one that uses sunglasses as the primary plot device and has Roddy Piper delivering more zingers than you could possibly hope to shake a fist at. Needless to say, 1988's They Live is Carpenter at his brilliant best. And yeah, Rob, I think I might love this film. Just to be clear, this is the first time I've ever seen this film. It's been on the list for years. I've actually owned it on DVD for the best part of a decade. And this was finally the excuse to go and watch it. And I cannot believe it's taken me this long because I really do love this film.
I'm shocked that you've had this film and never watched it. Never even had an inkling to go, you know what? I wonder what John Carpenter's done with this film. But you said a lot in that intro then in regards to consumerism, fake news, things like that. But the one I want to get to straight away is, if I asked you to put a pair of sunglasses on, wouldn't you just try them on?
Jesus Christ. Yeah, I would just try them on. But I am so glad that Keith David decided not to put those sunglasses on.
Oh,
I mean, as soon as he starts saying, I mean, what is it? Either put these glasses on or start eating that trash can. If Roddy Piper said that to me, I'd be like, I'm putting those fucking glasses on.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it leads to what I genuinely think might be the greatest on-screen fist fight of all time. Like, there's great action sequences, there's great fight scenes, but just a full-on old-fashioned fist fight, which goes on for 6 goddamn minutes between two people. It's so good. It's so good.
There's a reason why, and we'll cover this now, but there's a reason why it looks so good. Because aside from the face shot and the groin shot, they're real punches.
Well, it legitimately looks like a real fight. So that is the great thing about it.
It was going to be like a 20-second fight. And then when they showed John Carpenter what they've come up with, he was like, no, we'll keep it all in. And like you said, it goes for like nearly 6 minutes. And they decided to just beat the crap out of each other to make it look real, except for hitting each other in the face and the groin. And to be fair, I'm so glad they decided not to do real groin shots. Because at one point, Keith David, and I counted them, I'm pretty sure it's about 6 knees to Roddy Piper's testicle.
I counted them. And it's brilliant because it comes so soon after Roddy Piper goes to... Because this fight scene, has a narrative to it. It has like 4 or 5 stages. And I read somewhere that this is a fight scene which has 4 or 5 logical endings, but just decides to keep plowing through them. Like, there are moments when you're like, well, that's the end of the fight. And then it keeps going, and that's the end of the fight. And every time, even though it's always a traditional fist fight, it always feels slightly different. Like, at the start, there's the reluctant fist fight. Then there's the committed fist fight. Then there's the dirty fight. And then there's the wrestling match. Yeah. It just keeps evolving. And because they have that scene where they are having that reluctant fight at the start, like they're almost kind of pulling their punches. But then Roddy Piper goes to knee Keith David in the balls. He's like, you dirty son of a bitch. And he gets him back so fucking bad. Like, when you're watching it, you're like, oh my God. You know, like, the great thing about it, what it reminded me of, and not just because it's Roddy Piper, you know, in wrestling, when they get them in the corner and they start punching them in the head and everyone starts counting 1, 2. It was like that, but with knees to the crotch. So only you're wincing at the same time.
You want to talk committed to that fight scene, mind? You don't get any more committed than when Roddy Piper's holding a 2x4 and he swings for the fences at Keith David so hard that he spins around twice. Like, the momentum of that 2x4 just makes him spin in a 360. I mean, we will caveat. We've gone straight into the fight scene, right? If you're listening to this podcast and you haven't seen the film, I mean, what are you doing? But secondly, the reason why is there are these sunglasses that are making you see aliens who are in disguise, and the billboards and everything is basically subliminal messaging, trying to get you to obey the aliens because they're trying to take over your planet. And Roddy Piper finds these glasses. He needs somebody to believe him. We will get to the fact that he tried to get Meg Foster first, and that just escalated super quick. But
we'll get to that soon.
The fights then, he's trying to get Keith David, who was the guy who kind of just took a shine to Roddy Piper at the beginning of the film, tried to show him the ropes of I guess, working for cash and then staying in a homeless encampment. Mm-hmm. And then, but what I love is just before this, Roddy Piper puts the glasses on. For another escalated quickly. He went from putting the glasses on to killing 2 coppers, who were aliens, of course, then for going into a bank, killing a bunch of people in the bank, and then kidnapping Meg Foster. But Keith David kind of all right with that? I mean, first of all, his first words were, I've got a wife and kids. I don't want nothing to do with you. But he still sought him out to give him his week's pay and then hope that was it. I mean, if this guy has murdered as many people as they say he has, you don't want nothing to do. You want to avoid him.
Well, you can see in his eyes, like Keith David's got a fantastic glint in his eyes throughout this film. And you can see he's kind of caught between that whole, like, he clearly, like you said, he takes a liking to him immediately without much dialogue. And we'll get to the fact that this film has a surprisingly slow start in just a moment. But you can see in all these scenes, like Keith David's like, listen, I know I don't want to get involved with you. And he's, he is outwardly saying that because it's almost like rather than telling Roddy Piper or Nada, whatever his ridiculous name, he's basically telling himself, he's like, no, I can't get involved. But he clearly wants to. Like a perfect example is that fight sequence. He could just put on the sunglasses, have a look, go, in his mind, he's like, this guy's crazy. Yeah. So he's like, I could just put him on and be like, you're out of your mind and walk off. But no, he wants to have that goddamn fight. There's a part in his brain he wants to get in the fight. He wants to get involved. He's bored of this humdrum working class lifestyle where he's being put upon by the upper classes and not getting paid properly. He wants to fight back, but at the same time, he's kind of caught between the two worlds of like, oh, I need this paycheck, but also fuck these guys. I want to get involved. And that's what, there's a number of reasons why Keith David is fantastic in this film, but that's one of them. But you mentioned there the fact that this fight scene in particular comes out of nowhere. And it is interesting going in and watching this film. Like, obviously I was aware of this movie. I'm aware of the bubblegum quote, of the fight, of the aliens or the ghouls, whatever you want to call them, sorry. But when you go into this film, the first 30 minutes are really slow. And not in a bad way, but they're really considered. A lot of it is, kind of building a sense of place, this kind of weird LA, but not LA. Is it a dystopian future or is it set in the 80s? It's never quite made clear, other than the lack of mobile phones. If you said, well, this was actually supposed to be set, and mullets, of course. This was set in like 2002. I'd be like, yeah, sure, why not? But it kind of builds up the kind of the world and the narrative that he's trying to sell. Obviously, the decidedly unsubtle social commentary, which was talked about at the top of the podcast. But then all of a sudden, once it goes off, it goes off. Like Roddy Piper is for the first 20, 30 minutes, is a surprisingly mild-mannered stand-in for, I guess, the traditional cowboy, for the working class, as a traditional drifter. He hardly says a thing. And then all of a sudden, like you said, he's shooting down cops. He's got 2 shotguns strapped to him, and he's just rattling off zingers left, right, and center. I'm like, where the fuck did this come from? This guy's hardly said a word for 30 minutes. He's
the High Plains drifter, isn't he? He's the guy that comes into town and kind of rescues the town, basically, in regards to that. So, first of all, you said Nada. I will get to the fact that they don't mention his name at all. In the film, like his name is never mentioned. So the reason why they credit him as Nada is because it's the name of the character his character is based on from the book, from the short story being called, I did have it written down, 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a 1963 short story that this film is based on. So they literally just had to give him something in the credits, so they just credited him as Nada.
I thought it might have been like, again, part of the whole social commentary thing, where it's like Nada is in nothing, like he's a nobody.
So I suppose it's that as well.
I thought maybe that comes from the book, but I had no idea. I just thought maybe it was one of those things. But hey, I'm just going to keep referring to him as Roddy Piper.
Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper.
Rowdy Roddy Piper. And I tell you, speaking of Roddy Piper,
can I just say his hair? Sure. Sorry, I just want you mentioned his hair is fantastic. It is perfectly coiffed. It is moving. Like it needs its own credit.
I think it does. Like, I think it is, I think if you were kind of like looking 80s action movie mullet and you had to like looked it up in the dictionary, I think that is it. Like it's a dictionary definition of an 80s movie mullet. It's just absolutely bang on. And everything about him, like he's a rough diamond for sure. Like, let's be clear, on an acting basis, like specifically, he's no Kurt Russell. He's just not. But there's something about him. Like obviously he's used to being in front of the camera with the wrestling and stuff. but he's got, again, that glint in his eye. Like, he's a really likable screen presence in this film. And the other thing is, when I grew up with WWF in the 80s, of course, Roddy Piper was always standing next to Hulk Hogan or fucking Andre the Giant or something like that. So I always thought, I thought he was a small guy. And then you see him in this when he takes his top off. And like, he's ginormous. He's so big.
Any excuse to take his top off as well, right at the beginning, like, dude, we got to show how built you are. So there, the top comes off. He is absolutely built. But you said about it as well. As a wrestler who becomes an actor, he does really well, especially if you compare to the other wrestlers at the time, their acting. Like Hulk Hogan's acting is not the best.
They really tried with him because, like, you know, make no mistake, he was like one of the most famous people in the world in the 80s, undoubtedly. But
because this was a mainstream film by a mainstream director at this point, this wasn't one of the traditional WWF/WWE Jones that Vince McMahon would get them to do. Like Vince McMahon trying to get him to do family-friendly things and things like that.
Yeah. So, no, this is a million miles away from
because Roddy Piper. Because Vince McMahon tried to get Piper not to do this film and said, look, in 4 months, I'll get you a film. But Piper said, no, I'm going to do this. So he actually quit the WWF to do this.
Well, that's the interesting thing with this film and the fact that, you know, and you are correct, it was being released as a mainstream movie. But there are mainstream movies, and then there's a 1980s John Carpenter mainstream movies.
Yeah, okay.
It's like, he was able to make these films off the back of the success of stuff like, well, basically Halloween, because most of his films bombed. I think everybody just loved the idea of them. And of course, nearly all his films became immediate hits on VHS and became cult classics and stuff like that. So that's why people keep giving him money. But none of this film, I think, was a moderate success. I think it was like a 4 million.
Well, it went to number one at the box office very quickly, didn't it? But then it just dropped like a stone.
Well, it's got really weird things because I was looking at numbers.com and it's got its budget down. It's just over $4 million. It's got a box office, a US box office of 13 million on the nose, but an international box office of $774. Now, to put that into perspective, they have a list of where that ranks globally in terms of the films they've looked at. Out of 23,600 films, its international box office is ranked 23,501st. So there's only 99 movies worse off internationally on that entire list. And I'm like, there's got to be something to that. Did they just release it in one cinema in one country, or has there been an error there? But the numbers, they just kind of caught my eye. But if you take that weird international anomaly aside, it's a humble hit, to say the least. But like all of his films, they've caught on afterwards. And this film, I'd say, less so than others. And I'd actually be interested, because obviously you've had more time to digest this. But I'm kind of on a bit of a John Carpenter kick recently. So recently I've watched The Fog for the first time. I've watched They Live. I've watched Assault on Precinct 13, finally, after seeing the remake years ago. Prince of Darkness is very much next on my list. But where does this kind of fall on the list of Carpenter films for you? Because obviously there's like the kind of top tier where I think of like Big Trouble in Little China, The Thing, Halloween, and maybe Escape from New York. Does it belong on that list, or does it belong alongside Starman, Village of the Damned, Escape from LA, and God forbid, Memoirs of an Invisible Man? You know, does it fit? Like, in my mind, it kind of fits in the middle of those two, but very much closer. It's not quite in that top tier, which isn't to criticize this film. I love this film. I don't think it's quite at the same level as The Thing and Big Trouble, but it's close, you know? That's based on my first viewing anyway.
They were the two in my mind as well, The Thing and Big Trouble. But
they're my favorites. I mean, I know Halloween is his film, but my favorite two are always going to be The Thing and Big Trouble for sure.
I would put it up there, mine, but that's because I've watched this. I'm not going to say I've watched this hundreds of times. We're still in maybe single digits. We're talking about 8-9 times I've watched this film. But I don't know, this film just seems to get better, to progress further every time you watch it, because there's little nuances. There's little nuances that you pick up, and there's things like that. Because just how he fell into it at the beginning. You've already mentioned the beginning of this film, like it goes slow, but he just kind of drifts to the homeless encampment, which is across the road from a church, and nobody's fooling them with that recording of singing 24/7, by the way, but okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, they apparently are fooling everyone but Roddy Piper, and it's like you're being sold on the idea that he's this kind of, you know, almost like detective level.
I love
You know,
as well.
And it's like, come on, man. It's so, although I'll buy into the idea that maybe everyone has an idea of what's going on and they just don't want to mess with it. Whereas Roddy Piper just has to stick his nose in, of course.
I loved as well when he tripped over and fell into that fake wall and found the box of sunglasses, right? Because that is the clumsiest fall. Like, he is a big dude. Trying to make that look dainty and graceful like they did, like, oh, I had a fall, and nobody else heard that, was outstanding. It was so fucking funny. Just before that, did you recognize the drifter? I say the homeless guy who then becomes the collaborator at the end. Did you recognize him?
No, he looked familiar, but I didn't actually. I totally forgot to check out in the listings on IMDb.
We've mentioned him a few times on this podcast. His name is George Buck Flowers, and he is credited a lot of time as drifter, homeless man. I mean, when you have a niche, you do it. I think the important one that we've mentioned on this podcast is he was in Back to the Future as the guy who sleeps on the bench.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it just made me laugh, actually, because ever since Back to the Future, and I checked his credit, and throughout the 80s and 90s, he just played homeless man, drifter, drunk. I like to look out for him in these films, so it was really interesting to see him again.
I'm sure I had a note of this, but I can't seem to find it. But I'm sure in like the opening, one of the big opening action sequences when the cops suddenly show up in the church and it kind of goes off and they start shooting everyone up. And it's surprisingly violent, actually, that sequence, is they've got our favorite Asian American bad guy, you know, the dude from Lethal Weapon and stuff. I'm sure he's in it for a split second.
Oh, the one from Die Hard who eats a Nestle Crunch.
Yeah. That dude. Whose name I forgot. I've got it written down.
I'll find it now. I'm pretty sure. But he's
because I looked in the credits and I couldn't find him. But there's a sequence in an alleyway. And I mean, this is going to sound racist, of course, if it's not him, but he's got this isn't like, I mixed him up with another Asian. Like, he's got such a distinctive look. And he's in it for a split second, but I was like, I'm sure that's him. You know, he's got that distinctive hair. He's got the facial hair and stuff.
Al Long, he was Genghis Khan in Bill and Ted as well.
Bill and Ted, yeah. I literally, as you said it, I found Al Long. So, yeah, I was convinced that he just shows up for a second. But in 1988, you're thinking, surely if he's on screen, he's he's not famous. He's not a household name. For example, I couldn't remember his name just then. But he's been in a lot of big movies in admittedly small parts. And I'm like, I can't believe. Well, maybe he's just there for a day, but I thought.
Well, he's not in the IMDb list, even because IMDb class you as uncredited as well. So he's not in that list either. So.
Well, maybe I'm wrong, but it was just a split second where I was convinced I'd seen Al Long. But maybe it's just because it's an 80s action film and I'm accustomed to seeing Al Long in these films. But hey-ho. Sorry, I've taken us down a rabbit hole with a dead end. I do apologize.
Yeah, because I've Googled him now, right? And, you need to see the picture of him now.
Oh, is he still looking... Oh, he looks magnificent. He looks
great.
Imagine
he looks like Mr. Miyagi if he grew his his white beard out a bit more.
Well, he looks like, you know, that kind of perfect thing where if you say you're watching an 80s film and Al Leong's in it and they aged him up, like how would he look in 30 years or 40 years, whatever? It's like he looks exactly like that. Like he's still very much, you know, some people you look, I think they've lost something. They don't really look at how, you know, they've kind of lost the iconic look. The iconic look is still there. Yeah. He's still got the facial hair. He's still got the hair. It's just grayer and he's a bit older.
Obviously. You definitely know who he is.
He certainly is. Speaking of knowing who they are, you mentioned again earlier, we have to come back to Holly.
That's literally where my next step is going to be.
And Meg Foster's insane eyes. Now, she has to be the most, I mean, her turn around, her, you know, which, let's be clear, makes no sense at the end of the film. When she kind of like turns on Roddy Piper, it makes no sense.
No.
But at the same time, you're like, well, surely that was coming because she looks like the most evil character in the world. And I was like, why does she look so evil? I'm like, well, she literally played Evil Lynn. Yeah, and I think she just kept in the goddamn contact lenses because she has the most... Like, her eyes are so evil.
But they're not the contact lenses. That's the thing. They're her eyes.
I know her eyes are insane. She just has to be a bad guy or a bad girl, whatever you want to call it.
There's a film, right? There's a Rutger Hauer film called Blind Fury, where Rutger Hauer's in the Vietnam War. He gets blinded. He gets rescued by a Vietnam village, and they teach him how to fight with a sword as a blind man. And he goes back then to find his friend Terry. Yeah, he goes back to find his friend Terry O'Quinn. who's mixed up with drugs. He doesn't find Terry O'Quinn at the beginning. He finds his son and the mother, played by Meg Foster. And as soon as I see Meg Foster dressed up in a nurse's outfit, I immediately think at some point she's going to be bad.
Yeah.
I mean, spoiler alert.
Her eyes are so intense.
Spoiler alert, she's not. She's just a normal, loving mother, but it's insane because there's a certain number of characters that you watch on film, and if they come onto film or if they're in a TV show and they're a guest in a TV show, you're like, immediately, you're the bad guy.
Yeah, and sometimes it's based on what's come before. I had that problem, and again, it was partly like the order I watch things, but I was a big fan of what was the fucking Top Gun stand-up with Charlie Sheen?
Hot Shots.
Hot Shots. I watched that loads when I was younger, and then after that, whenever I saw Charlie Sheen, I just thought he was going to like pull a zinger or do something stupid. Yeah. And I just couldn't shift it out of my head. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was never the greatest action star in the film, but he never had a chance with me because I just couldn't take him seriously. And with Meg Foster, it's not her fault because it's not necessarily based on previous roles. She just has evil eyes. She does. And they do her no favors in this film by giving her super intense makeup as well.
Yeah.
And of course, this might have been helped if she had any chemistry whatsoever with Roddy Piper, but there's none. And it's like they filmed it. I bet you cash money that there is another version of the script where she's involved in the story more. Instead, she has that opening sequence with Roddy Piper, which is really awkward, really stilted, with those crazy eyes. She throws him out of a window. Really should have killed him.
She straight up tries to murder him.
Oh, she
the
totally
way she swings that bottle, there's no just, I'm going to knock you out.
Well, no, I don't blame her. Like, in fairness, for a film, like, you get this guy, he comes to a house. Again, let's go back to the fact that Roddy Piper is ginormous. Like, if he suddenly decides to turn on her, she's like, man, I haven't got a chance. This guy is a fucking unit. So she has this opportunity, and fair play to her. I think she is trying to kill him. She's
what
like,
the fuck was that bottle made out of as well? Because that bottle, the momentum sends him through the window, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we mentioned it previously on loads of podcasts, like when we said about Indiana Jones, where they're in a forest and all of a sudden they're on a beach in a banquet. Mm-hmm. Out of nowhere, all of a sudden they're on top of a like her house is just based on a cliff, basically.
Well, I mean, that is the thing. Like, geographically, it makes sense because it's set in LA and there's a lot of houses in the hills, kind of thing. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I think those houses probably be maybe a bit too expensive for her considering her job. But I guess, is she, she's not in cahoots with the aliens at this point. It makes sense later on, but whatever. But of course, they don't really do any establishing shots. So you just think, oh, he's gone out of a window. And you're like, wait a minute, is he falling off a cliff now? What the fuck? So yeah, you watch it, you're like, he should be dead. But of course, what they're really doing is setting up at that point for her to be this kind of recurring character throughout the film. But then she just disappears. Like, she is hardly in the film for the rest of it. And I'm convinced that, like, listen, these two, there's too much going on. They have no chemistry. You've got her face, you've got his body, his hair. This is too much. We'll just have her reintroduced at the end and just be done with it. And the end of this film, which we will get to, it's brilliant, but fuck me, is it rushed? Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Again, it's the 90-minute thing. It's like, well, this is going to be a 90-minute film. Forget about it.
I love it when they show up to the secret hideout, right? And there's no question. They haven't questioned these two guys. I know the guy is the one who works at the homeless encampment, so he already has a passing resemblance to Keith David and Roddy Piper. So that's fine. But he leads them in. He went, right, boys, kit yourselves up. Just grenades, just guns, just go to town. So they seem to be the only guys then who are kitting themselves up. Yeah. And then when they're telling that story, both guys are stood at the back of the room, just pointing their guns in the air, just fingers on triggers, like they're just ready for something. And then Meg Foster arrives again then, and she's like, oh, yeah, by the way, I believed you after all that. I'm sorry I tried. Are you okay? No, love, I'm not okay. You hit me in the back of the head. I went out through a plate glass window. I fucking fell like 70 feet. I landed very hard. I rolled. Do you know what I mean?
I should be dead. Like, I'm very lucky I'm not dead.
30 minutes later, I ended up in the cleanest rubbish truck I've ever seen. It's just full of cardboard boxes. I mean,
yeah, it totally is.
It's the cleanest rubbish truck ever. And the driver who doesn't know I'm in there, it's okay. He still tipped the rubbish truck onto its bloody Like,
yeah, there was no real reason for that, because I thought when he was in it, it was going to be like a trash compactor situation. We were going to have a kind of Star Wars New Hope kind of problem, or for some odd reason, it's popped in my head, Superman 3, same problem. And I thought it was going to be this big dramatic scene where he was stuck in, and it's like, oh, is he going to get out? But it's like, no, it just kind of gently tips him out, and it's just like it's all cardboard boxes, which means a quite gentle landing as well.
As it drives off, it's just there in the air, so that's fine. And then, love, I got fucked up for 5 to 6 minutes. This guy kneed me 5 times in the dick. Do you know what I mean? And now I've got a headache from wearing these sunglasses all day and seeing all these aliens. No, I'm not okay.
No, he's not going to be okay. Although, like, I guess it makes sense because he's a wrestler, but he's great at taking an ass whipping in this film.
Mate, yeah.
Like, you know, him rolling down the hill, all this looks convincing. And this is the last time I'll bring up that fight. But one of my favorite things about it was that even though it doesn't last long, is after the fight,
it doesn't last long.
They look fucked up though.
Yeah.
Like they really do. Like usually they kind of like, oh, they'll have a split lip and it'll be kind of like movie bruises and stuff. But you see like Roddy Piper's face in particular, it's all blown up. His lips are swollen and he looks terrible. And you're like, Jesus Christ, is he going to look like that for the rest of the film? No, that clears up in the next 5 minutes. But they do at least have that moment on screen of him looking a complete mess, which I really appreciate.
It's them walking with the sunglasses then, isn't it? And they're both like holding, they're walking, and they've been battered. It's like you've played a rugby game and you're just like getting back to the locker room. You're just fucked. But they managed to get into the hotel room then, put some water on their wounds, and we're fine.
Yeah.
You know, this water in LA, dude. This water in LA just clears it right up.
It's magic water. It's the equivalent of the footballing magic sponge, I think. Yeah. That's the trick. But Jesus Christ. But yeah, he's fantastic in this. And as I said, like at least afterwards, they kind of show him beaten up. So, you know, he's bruised and battered, not very kind of like cinematic, not very hero leading man. But they kind of totally make up for it by having him have those moments, those zingers. I mean, you know, I've written down some of his quotes. Mama don't like no tattletales. The golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. It looks like you dipped your face in cheese back in 1957. That's like pouring perfume on a dog. That's just 4 of the many, many quotes. But of course, the famous one was to the top, the bubblegum quote, which again comes out of nowhere. There's no sign that this character is going to start delivering these zingers. But when he does, he just doesn't stop. But as soon as he goes into the bank, and he's got the sunglasses and he's got the shotguns, it was almost like it doesn't make any sense that he would find that many guns in a policeman's car. But like the fight sequence, there's the whole, just why not? Why not have a 6-minute fight sequence? It's like, well, does it make sense that Roddy Piper is going to suddenly start like spouting off singers and he'll have all these guns? It's like, why not? It just looks cool. And that is what I love about this film. It's like at some point, it's like, yes, you have this like very, again, unsubtle social commentary. Sure, you've got the narrative with the aliens and stuff, but it's just a lot of the time, it's like, oh, this is just be cool. Let's just do it. And when he walks into the bank and he's got the mullet and the sunglasses, it's just instantly iconic. It's so 80s, but in just the best possible way.
That bubblegum quote is Piper's as well. He had it written down in a notebook with probably a load of those other zingers that he wanted to use for the wrestling. And when he gave it to John Carpenter, John Carpenter said, we got to use it. But because he wanted to use it in one of his promos that he does for WWF. And he did use it after when he went back to WWF then. But it's one of like it's basically ad-lib by Piper. That is Piper's quote, and it's such a famous quote. It is like
it's such a famous quote, and it's weird because it's an absurd quote, but obviously in the film he has this kind of image as that kind of Western style kind of character as the drifter who walks into town. And the first time I tried to do the quote out loud, funnily enough, I ended up sounding like John Wayne. I'm here to kick ass and chew gum, Pilgrim. You know, it kind of came out like that, you know, and it's just bizarre that, and I think maybe part of it's the score. Like, you know, I look at certain disparate parts of this film, like with the mullet and all that jazz. It's like, it shouldn't work for the kind of character they're trying to establish, but it just does bizarrely. And a part of that, again, is that score. It's another John Carpenter score, but you listen to it and it does so much for the narrative. That main theme in particular, it really does kind of set, like, it's part modern Western, part a kind of classic drifter track. And it kind of helps to establish the character. And I think maybe they overcorrect like halfway through the film because the intro, they really are leaning into that kind of character template. Then at that point, they ostensibly just abandon it in favor of a kind of 60-minute shootout after that point.
I do love as well that there's no explanation.
I'm willing to go with it. Totally.
There's no explanation as to how he knows how to handle all these different types of weapons and stuff. It just happens.
Just accept it. Just accept it.
Well,
did they say that he used to be in the army? Or
no, Frank was. Keith David was in him. Yeah.
I think I'm just because he kind of has a slightly John Rambo from First Blood vibe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the pack he's wearing and everything. It gives you the army
definitely
feel.
got the look.
But
yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, right? When he first puts the glasses on and he starts slagging off this woman in the shop, and she then calls her radio, her watch, and everyone else is on their watch. Mm-hmm. You don't need glasses to see people talking into their watch.
No, you don't. But I guess the idea is that, like everything else, is the walls over your eyes, and you probably just wouldn't pay attention. Like maybe that's all I can think.
You wouldn't pay attention until you see 60 people in the street going, "Yeah, there's a dude by here with a shotgun." He's like you then turn around and go, "Have I missed something?"
Yeah, but that I guess that's the point, is that that's all you would do. You go, well, that's weird. And then before you know, it's kind of over and things kind of keep moving on. But maybe it is the subliminal message. And that is one of the great iconic things of this film is this. I mean, obviously the sunglasses are cool. And to have it as a plot device, it's so simple and cheap, but just it's just a great excuse to have your kind of leading men wearing sunglasses, which
but I always forget then, towards the end of the film, there's no more sunglasses because it then becomes contact lenses.
Yeah.
And that if anyone's ever had to put contact lenses in their eyes, the scene where the two guys do it is
not buying it. Not buying it. I thought I wear contact lenses semi-regularly, and they're always a nightmare to put in. If it was the first time you're putting in contact lenses and you're just like, whoop, off to the fucking races. It's kind of like sex in cinema, where everyone's just like, they're having sex up against the wall with no problems. I'm like, come on, guys. This is going to be at least a few attempts when you miss the mark.
How you're able to have sex with the covers on you constantly. I'm sorry, that just doesn't happen. But
or sex underwater. Jesus Christ. I'm never tried that, by the way.
Of everything I can believe in this film, I take for granted. Like the whole alien thing, that's fine. The magic sunglasses, that's fine. But being able to put contact lenses in that quick, I don't know.
Isn't it strange how certain things, it was like the Near Dark podcast, where it's like, sure, vampires, why not? But as soon as somebody was drinking milk with dinner, it took me out of the film. And it was the same with this. I'm like, come on, man. No one's putting in, a pro's not putting in contact lenses that quickly, let alone someone for the first time. But I get it. They're like, we can't have them wearing sunglasses for the entirety of the film. And they've obviously already established this idea that you can't wear them for too long. It's all about kind of, narrative kind of evolution and stuff like that. But it is a shame, that they had to remove the sunglasses because it just looks great. But what else looks great is the world itself. When you put on the sunglasses, it's not just you see the aliens or the ghouls.
Yeah.
Everything's in this kind of stark, really stark black and white. And I'm not sure if it was by design or by kind of necessity, but everything when they put on the glasses looks really stagey. Everything looks like they're kind of miniatures quite often and stuff.
Well, it then becomes
which it often is.
It becomes like a 50s B movie.
100%. And
in regard, you see the spaceship flying across and things like that.
Yeah. And I couldn't decide if they did that on purpose or whether it was like a budget or a design issue, but it works perfectly. And what it does make is it makes this film so visually iconic. The ghouls are iconic for sure, but the imagery of Obey, you see this nowadays, these T-shirts with Obey and stuff. And I bet you most people, when they see that, they don't make the connection to this film. And it's the one thing, it just makes it's odd because it's at the same time stagey, but also incredibly cinematic. But it makes for a very unique visual experience, I suppose, for fear of sounding slightly douchey there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love the transition as well between the glasses and the real world, as it were. I say real world, the real world is the aliens world, isn't it? But
yeah, I get where you're going from. But,
so when he's looking at the Caribbean poster, and he's got the glasses halfway off and halfway on. That transition is fantastic. We were on about the sunglasses as well. I think they missed a trick here with not having the Corey Hart song sunglasses at night. Whilst they're walking, like the scene where they're both wearing their sunglasses and they're walking to the secret meeting. You needed sunglasses at night just over that little.
That would be cool. And maybe it would stop me thinking about how dopey the end of this film is. Because as you say, like once you get into the kind of nitty gritty towards the end of this film and they go to the secret meeting, like geographically and spatially, it all stops making sense for me.
Yes.
So I'm like, they just, we're led to believe that these aliens and ghouls, and I do want to talk about the design of them and get your kind of your opinion on that. But they just kind of seem to just stroll in. Nobody seems to be paying attention. You think of these maybe they've just become lax because they've got a certain level of power. But they just seem to just stroll in, no danger at all. Their buddy who was homeless, not only has been kind of turned around at a moment's notice into one of the kind of rich elite, but he's incredibly well informed. You've got to go on the basis that he's been kind of taken on by these aliens, 2-3 days ago, max?
Yeah.
And he has all the information. He's been told all the security details, and he's only too keen to two friends who, let's be clear, don't look like they belong in our party. He's just sort of, let me just unload all this detail for you, just to make things as convenient as possible. It's a really strange ending, and you kind of just need to go with it. But even the building itself, like obviously you have the kind of ballroom situation, but then when they go, I'm not sure if it's underground or above ground or whatever, but suddenly it starts looking like a real John Carpenter film at that point. It has like an almost Escape from LA theme.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, like at that point, they're still in the building, but there's a bit where the aliens are traveling back to their home planet on Andromeda. And of course, they actually do a relatively decent job of explaining how they're doing it via, they mentioned gravitational lenses and bending of the light and stuff. And I was all on board with that. And I'm like, because, even Andromeda, I think it's like 2.5 million light years away. So even if you're traveling at the speed of light, it would take 2.5 million years of consistent travel to get there. So they kind of explain, they've got a different way of doing things, whatever. But in the building itself, where is this tiny little convenient spaceport? I couldn't get my head around it.
I have no idea. I have no idea, because it was the whole weird thing as well when they were in the alley having that gunfight, and then they dropped into the emergency portal, and then they ended up, and it was like they ended up down there, but then they. Where did they end? Like, where did they go?
Well, my issue was, like, they went through the portal. They ended up in this weird place. So initially, I'm like, they could be on an alien planet. They could be somewhere in orbit, whatever. But then I'm pretty sure they just kind of come up through the building and then end up on the top of a building in the city. And that's when you have the final sequence. So that was like, wait, all that spaceport and stuff is in the building. Are we supposed to just go alien shit? It's just alien shit.
I think it is. It's Doctor Who TARDIS type stuff, isn't it? It's bigger on the inside.
Yeah, we'll just go with that. That's absolutely super. But I did love the icon, like the imagery of that. Like I said, that sequence in particular really did feel like classic Carpenter. Although I did love the random appearance of a PKE meter from Ghostbusters.
Yes, as the communicator.
Yeah. Like it's not even subtle. It's one. They haven't put anything on it. They haven't like dressed it up. It's just a fucking PKE meter from Ghostbusters in the middle of this film used as a communicator. It doesn't even make sense as a communicator. They were just like, we've got PKE meters. Let's just use those. And this is 4 years after Ghostbusters. This isn't like a subtle thing. Ghostbusters was one of the biggest films in the world, and they might as well have fucking proton packs just randomly in this film. I couldn't believe that they just had PKE meters, and they're like, we're just going to use these as basically iPhones. It's really strange.
Do you know what I did love though? And they don't do it often as well because audiences don't seem to like it, but I suppose it works quite well with this film. The hero dies.
Yeah.
Like, they all die. Like,
it is quite surprising.
They've made the aliens visible, or the ghouls, whatever. They're aliens at the end of the day. So they made the aliens visible. That's fine. The world now sees them for what they are. Great. Mm-hmm. But then, like the hero's dead now. That's it.
It was so abrupt. It's like, like all the way through, I'm kind of watching the film, and again, take it from the perspective that I've never seen this film before. It's all building up toward this moment, and then it felt like within the space of 2 minutes, his friend Frank is dead. Holly, who we haven't seen for ages, is a turncoat. Roddy's dead, but it's kind of cool because he flips in the bird before he goes. And then there's aliens everywhere. Everyone knows credits, and I'm like, they have just enough time to throw in some 80s tits. Some totally unnecessary 80s tits right at the end of the film. I was like, thank God, I didn't think they were going to have any. But it's just like completely unnecessarily in like the 89th minute of a 90-minute movie. But I like the end because it makes it memorable. But again, it's so strange because they spend so much, like, it's a slow burn. Like, there's 30 minutes when they really take their time establishing world, character, place. And then once they get their skates on, fuck me, they're like, listen, this isn't going to be longer than 95 minutes. We're getting this done. And the ending in particular, it has that more Escape from LA feel. Like that was the visual style I took from the end of this film specifically, especially the stuff on the roof with the lasers and everything.
You're addicted to Escape from LA at the moment.
Not Escape from LA, sorry. I said Escape from LA. I'm obviously obsessed.
You're about Escape from New York.
Escape from New York, sorry. You know, everything's dark, everything feels oppressive, there's lasers going on and shootouts. It very much has that classic Carpenter feel at that point. But you get like 5 minutes of it and then the film just ends. I like the end, but it's mental. But then you can say that for so many of Carpenter's films.
I'm pretty sure he sacrificed end for beginning, because he was trying to set something up. Like you say, that world building. I mean, you've got a scene that's probably pointless, but they're trying, where the two are just sat there eating their dinner. They're just talking about how Frank's got wife and kids somewhere in Pittsburgh or somewhere like that, you know. And you know, he said about wife and kids, and then during the fight, he said about his wife and kids again. And all I could think about was Benny from Total Recall. Shit, man, I got 5 kids.
5 kids to feed. Well, I had that other issue with these films. Like, you know, he seems to be going like hand to mouth, like one meal to the next. Yeah. And of course, all I'm thinking is, dude, do you know how much you have to eat to get that fucking jacked? It's like,
well, dude, you got to serving of peas, dude. That's what happened. It was man. Like, there's homeless people out there queuing, and they give it. Do you want some more? Yeah, I'll have some more peas.
Dude, he should be eating skinless chicken breast between fight scenes to get that big. But like you said, it is that kind of like weird disparity between the action movie that this film is and the social commentary, because you know that social commentary is totally there. It's unsolved, but you know, it's all about greed, about propaganda, the danger of consumerism. It's like, obviously, I guess, you know, if we go into legacy, the fact that we haven't heeded Carpenter's warnings, and as I said, it does feel more pertinent than ever. But it's just, it kind of abandons that in favor of an action movie halfway through. It's like, all right, but he kind of wants his cake and eats it. You could argue that maybe in a more refined film, you could have that narrative running through the movie instead of kind of having half of this kind of social commentary movie and then half of just an action movie where Roddy Piper shoots up aliens. But it is what it is, and it still makes for a totally fun film.
There wasn't much more explanation, was there, either? Because there was the whole, like, they're fucking up the ozone to make it habitable for them. Yeah. It's habitable anyway because they're there. So
well, I guess it's just kind of make it easier for them. But there's loads of, like, again, throwaway lines like, oh, you know, we're their third world country, you know, which again is a kind of not a nod to, you know, foreign policy for the United States and stuff like that. But it is just one line. You know, they just kind of throw it in there amongst all the kind of consumer. So there are like layers, and there's clearly something he's trying to say. But at the same time, he's like, every time you think, oh, maybe this is going somewhere, it's like, oh, well, let's just shoot aliens. Let's just shoot aliens. And the problem is all that stuff is the iconic stuff, I suppose. So it does feel a touch clumsy at times, but no less iconic all the same.
How do you feel about the design of the aliens? I think for this whole 50s B-movie satire that they're trying to give you, especially considering they said they'd been there since the 50s. I think 53 was mentioned at one point. So what do you like? I think that design fits really well with what they're trying to deliver. I really like the way the aliens look. I don't know if you feel the same.
I do. The aliens very much, as I described, kind of like the billboards and the posters. It kind of has this kind of weird combination of being like really stagey but really cinematic. Like, you look at them and you see them without the kind of context of the movie itself, and you'd be like, they look a bit shit. Like, there's no two ways about it. They look a bit like shit.
Yeah.
But in the context of the film, with the sunglasses, with everything else going on, what they do look is iconic as well. And as you said, you know, as a nod to 50s B movies, it totally works. So it's like in and of itself, I think if you just showed someone, we'll get to it eventually, the whole like, would you kind of encourage other people? Would you recommend it to others? If you showed somebody who knew nothing about this film a picture of the aliens in this film, they would look and go, dude, that looks shit. They'd be like, it looks terrible. Yeah. But in the movie, like so much else, it just works. It works in context. It works as a nod to 80s B movies. It works alongside the kind of obey and all the imagery that comes with it. So they do have that weird mix of looking both rubbish and awesome at the same time. And again, I'm not sure if they purposefully look slightly shit, but again, like it just works.
Yeah, it works really well.
The other thing is, you think of all these other films where, how many films look just like Aliens nowadays, or, the kind of classic gray alien, whatever. Like, there's always, you see aliens or monsters in film, and 9 times out of 10, they remind you of another film. No other aliens in movie history look like the movies in They Live, other than they have a vague B-movie 50s style, but there's no movie from the 50s where you're like, oh, well, this is what it's based on. It just, again, I keep coming back to that word iconic, because nothing else looks like this film.
Randomly.
Nothing.
Do you know what they look like randomly? The Crypt Keeper.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why they're referred to as ghouls by the people who have seen them rather than aliens, because they do look like ghouls. They don't look like aliens. They look like monsters, day glow covered monsters. And it makes for like a visually amazing film. I see him, and I'm half expecting them to tell me a story about like with Billy Zane in or something like that. Well, again, it's just the weirdness. I mean, recently, because obviously people have been talking to John Carpenter for years about this film, and his kind of opinions changed on it, or certainly his stance. And he recently described this movie as a documentary rather than a sci-fi movie. And of course, it seems silly at a glance when you watch it and you see the ghouls, the aliens, the imagery, Roddy Piper. But then you watch the film and you think about it, and it's like, yeah, it does feel a bit like a documentary, and especially in 2022, which again is rather depressing. So again, it's this film which totally works on both ends of the spectrum, often kind of in a somewhat clumsy way, but it still works all the same. So if nothing else, it's definitely memorable.
Absolutely. You can't get away from it, really. I mean, like you say, even if somebody hasn't watched it, somebody can have a passing resemblance or passing knowledge of the line chew bubblegum, or the fight scene. I mean, the fight scene's been parodied with so many. I mean, Family Guy with the chicken parodied.
That's exactly what I thought of. Yeah, like it's weird because I'm watching it afterwards, so it feels like a parody of those. But yeah, there's I was like, there's nothing like this fight scene. Oh, except for him fighting
Peter Griffin and the chicken. Yeah,
yeah, brilliant.
So I just checking my notes because I know we're going to need to move on.
No, we do need to wrap this up. I mean, because it's a film you can kind of keep coming back to moments in this film over and over again. But yeah, we might as well just jump to love and hate. So I mean, in terms of love, I've got Roddy Piper again. He's not the best actor in the world, but he's got a great screen presence, and it's a shame he didn't get to do more movies. I mean, he did this and was it Frog Boys of Helltown or
Hell Comes to Frogtown, dude?
Close enough, yeah.
You say that, man. John Carpenter's on credit saying, like, they said, why did you hire Roddy Piper? And he said, Roddy Piper's done more films than I have.
Yeah, he had done a few, but
Roddy Piper's done 20 films, or more than 20 films, compared to the 20 that John Carpenter had done. So it's insane.
But these feel like the two big ones, don't they?
Oh, they
I was stupidly messed up the name, but Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Hell Comes to Frogtown.
And this were the same year, and it felt like one of those, like, if both of those films did really big numbers, it could have been a different career for him. But obviously, either he like took less of an interest, or the movie roles dried up. I'm not too sure, but he doesn't look out of place on screen. I don't think he's necessarily got the comedy chops of a John Cena, or he doesn't quite have the charisma of The Rock, and I think those two are like standouts in terms of wrestlers going into acting. But he's definitely got something of a screen presence, and it's a shame. And as I said, I think for this film in particular, he totally works on screen. Maybe he just belonged in the 80s.
Before you move, can I read the first line of what Hell Comes to Frogtown is about?
Yeah, go for it.
People that have never heard of it, right? I mean, it's probably going to come as no surprise.
Look at the poster. The poster's amazing.
Going to come as no surprise that I've seen Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Of course you have.
The film set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where few fertile men and women exist due to atomic fallout. As a result, the government places a high priority on those whom can still breed. Shortly before the movie opens, a group of mutant amphibians who have been exiled to the desert by humans capture a group of fertile women and are using them as sex slaves.
Amazing. And I bet you, I haven't seen this film, but I'm guessing Roddy Piper is fertile as a motherfucker.
Roddy Piper is a nomadic traveler. Oh, yeah.
There's a theme. Yeah. There's a theme. Yeah.
And fertile as a motherfucker. And his name, by the way, Sam Hell.
That's a fantastic.
He is the hell that comes to Frogtown.
Maybe he was right that his movie career didn't really go beyond the 80s because it just belongs in the 80s. God bless him. Talk about a cinematic 1-2 of They Live and Hell Comes to Frogtown. Unbelievable.
We are going to have to find Hell Comes to Frogtown now.
Right. Oh, yeah. I really need to see that film. Number 2, I've got Keith David, who I fucking adore in this film. I love him in everything he's in. I mean, I always go back to him absolutely stealing the show in Something About Mary.
Yeah.
It's like, how the hell did you get the beans about the French? That line just kept running through my head. But he's amazing in that film. He's just about amazing in everything he's in. And he's a fantastic foil for Roddy Piper. Because Roddy Piper is good, but I think Keith David brings all the warmth, brings all the charm to I think you need that additional character with him to add as I said, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but a bit of warmth to proceedings, which perhaps doesn't come from Roddy Piper. And I mean, obviously, I could put the fight, but I banged on for ages. But I will say the unique visual style of the alien world, hiding in plain sight. I just love the iconic imagery that goes around that. But yeah, number 4, also the fucking fight. The fight is the best.
You've kind of stolen. I say stolen mine. You went first, so it's not really stealing, but. I was Roddy Piper and Keith David together as number 1.
Oh, see, I should have done that. I should have I should have pulled them together. God
those two number because they're fantastic together. But like I said, I have. You've already explained it in better detail than I could about how those two are on screen, and I love them together. I think they're great.
Oh, they're great.
I've already said
they have all the chemistry that Roddy Piper doesn't have with Meg Foster.
Yeah,
and that was what they do. The real romance at the heart of this film is Roddy Piper.
They should have been the love interest. That should have been
I would have totally bought if they kissed at the end. I would have bought into it. I'm died for him. I'm over the moon.
They died in each other's arms or something.
They should have. They should have killed Meg Foster, kissed, and just died. It would have been so much better. I'm so glad he didn't kill Meg Foster because kiss. Kill is fine. Just don't kiss her because I wouldn't have bought into it. But him kissing Keith David, I'm on board. I'm totally on board.
Secondly, you've already said, and I've said it previously in this episode anyway, the visual style, especially the transition from alien world to our world. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Through the glasses, the way it just transitions. I think it looks great. I think
it looks
it's such an homage to 50s B movies, which I've always been a fan of anyway. So I absolutely think that's fantastic. And number 3 for me, we've said it a few times, is the fight. I imagine that's my third. The fight is fantastic. The fight is done so well. It makes you. It's insane. It is
insane. And I would say, for some odd reason you're listening to this, you haven't seen the film, and we haven't convinced you to see it, which is again in itself insane. At least watch the fight sequence. It's 6 minutes, and it's 6 minutes you will almost certainly adore. So, if nothing else, if you take nothing else from this podcast, watch the goddamn fight scene. I mean, Jesus Christ, we've gone on about it long enough.
Yeah.
In terms of hate, I mean, Holly's mental makeup, it's insane. Holly's contact lenses, yeah, that's number 2, and Holly's relationship with Roddy Piper, 3. I just don't buy into anything.
So Holly's very trans.
Yeah, well, no, because it's a bit unfair on Holly because she doesn't get much screen time. I keep calling her Holly, obviously it's Meg Foster, but she has those really intense eyes. They play up to it even more with really intense makeup, and then it doesn't help that she has zero chemistry with Roddy Piper, so it makes her feel that much colder as a character. So I just don't think she works in this film. I don't think she's necessarily needed. I could also say the abrupt ending, but I actually quite like the abrupt ending. I've kind of come around on that. So yeah, sadly all my hate is aimed towards the poor Meg Foster, it feels a bit harsh, but it is what it is.
I was kind of dragging the bottom of the barrel for my hate because given an extra set of an extra serving of peas to somebody who, like, when you're feeding all these homeless people, maybe you want to stretch it out a bit more. Like, the last person comes up and goes, sorry, mate, I gave Roddy Piper needs it. I mean, have you seen those muscles?
Seen the size of him?
Like,
Jesus Christ, he's going to stop wasting away.
That dude's got the tightest tits in the game. Like, he needs to bloody just carry on.
He is in good shape.
Yeah.
He's in good shape. Yeah.
So, I mean, secondly, then, like, who are you fooling with a recording of singing 24/7? Apparently everybody, but still.
No, that is suspect. So your points are much better than mine. Just all my hate pointed towards Meg Foster. Never mind.
And what was my final one? The coppers bloody leaving their shotgun unlocked.
Yeah, that was a bit suspect.
Even if they didn't leave their shotgun unlocked, the key was already in the lock anyway.
Yeah, again, the why not approach this film where they're just like, listen, we need to get Roddy Piper completely geared up immediately. So it makes no sense, but it gets them visually and narratively to where they need to be. So there are a few things in this film where you just kind of have to be like, I'm just going to let that slide. And of course, you're always rewarded because the payoff is always amazing. So every time they're just like, listen, can you just sweep this one under the rug? You're like, okay, but it's cool because something amazing is about to happen. So they totally get away with it. But yeah, that is a really good point. But also those goddamn eyes. Jeez.
Oh yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that Meg Foster's eyes, dude. Like,
it's brilliant if she's Evil Lynn, but when she's playing a character who you're supposed to believe isn't a turncoat, you're like, oh, I'm not sure about this. No one was surprised at the end of the film when she shows up. You're like, well, of course she's evil. She's Evil Lynn with her evil eyes and evil makeup. Jesus Christ.
And soft-spokenness as well. Like
she's whispering stuff, like into Skeletor's ear, for instance. So next up is Facts. This is well, I already mentioned the box office thing, and the fact that Roddy Piper and John Carpenter met at WrestleMania 3, which I'm going on a bit of a WrestleMania kick recently. My brother suddenly randomly got back into wrestling. WrestleMania, I think, was on last night, so I've kind of been going back and reading up. Oh, was it part one? Oh, God knows. But I mean, the one I remember growing up, well, the two I remember, WrestleMania 3 and WrestleMania 6 were the big ones for me in my youth kind of thing. And of all the places to meet the most iconic WrestleMania of all time. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Right. So once again, caveat it with there are millions of facts for this, so I've had to narrow it down.
Yeah.
This one I really like. Carpenter brought real homeless folks into the production for several scenes and smaller characters and gave them food as well as paychecks. Roddy Piper is on record saying, I thought that was a pretty classy thing to do. So that's good. So you're already homeless. Can you come in and play a homeless guy and I'll give you a meal and some money? So,
well, it just adds a bit of authenticity. I mean, we mentioned it at the start of, and I suspect these guys didn't get paid, sadly, at the start of the Beverly Hills Cop when we did the podcast. And there's no actors at the start. They just shoot the city. Yeah. So you see the real people of Detroit kind of, and the way that they live, and it adds this total, you couldn't get it from having something staged, and by having, genuinely, homeless people, it does add something. But obviously the nice thing about this is you assume that at least they're getting fed for being in the film. So that's something at least.
Roddy Piper, being a married man at the time of filming, refused to take off his wedding band. That's why in several scenes you can see the wedding ring on. That was interesting. I did notice that a few times as well.
I didn't notice that at all.
Because he's meant to be a drifter and all that, but he is wearing a wedding band on his.
I guess in the film, if you don't explain it, it adds this kind of layer of mystery and what's going on there, but it's just never explained, I suppose. Or they could have written it into the film if one for the fact they were so committed to this being a 90-minute and done movie, I suppose.
Many movie posters for the film featured a long blurb that read, "You see them on the street, you watch them on TV, you might even vote for one this fall. You think they're people just like you. You're wrong, dead wrong." I just like that as a fact. Just that is massive.
I noticed that on the poster because it's a great poster with that extreme close up of Roddy Piper's face where he's pulling down the sunglasses and it's got the alien face on it. But I know it's up, and it's in a weird place because it's so long. Usually you have the tagline right next to the title, but because it's so long, it's up in the top left corner of the poster because it's basically like a poem. It's insane, or a fucking haiku. It's quite bizarre, but it's still a cool tagline all the same.
John Carpenter was impressed with Keith David's performance in The Thing and needed someone who wouldn't be a traditional sidekick but could hold his own. To this end, Carpenter wrote the role of Frank specifically for Keith David.
Well, that's one of the things with Keith David, because obviously, and very few people in the world are, and it'd be almost ridiculous if he was cut to shreds like Roddy Piper as well. he looks simultaneously like a normal dude, but he totally looks like he can handle himself. And when he's suddenly fighting this totally jacked Roddy Piper, it doesn't feel like a mismatch. Like, you buy Keith David as this tough guy. Like, you see him in this fight and you're like, yeah, this feels like an even fight. And that's what Keith David, again, something he brings, is without having to kind of act necessarily tough all the time, you just naturally buy him as someone who is quite tough and who could get into a fight with Roddy Piper and come out potentially on top. Keith David's fantastic. I fucking love Keith David.
So after Nada kills several ghouls and exits into a side street, he comes face to face with a human cop who he disarms and tells to leave. The actual phrase he uses is "beat your feet." But according to Piper, the actor apparently misinterpreted it on the first take and began running in place. God bless him, Piper says. His heart was into it big time.
Yeah, no shit. He's an idiot, but, he's a lovable idiot, so we'll allow it.
The role of Nada was originally written for Kurt Russell, but Carpenter felt he should cast somebody else after casting Russell in 4 of his films prior to this one. Elvis, Escape from New York, The Thing, and Big Trouble in Little China.
I mean, he'd work though, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would.
Totally work. Yeah. I mean, don't be wrong, I'm so glad it's Roddy Piper, but at the same time, you watch this film and like, yeah, I can totally see Kurt Russell.
It's a bit of a different film with Russell, isn't it? It gives it a bit more like gravitas if it's Russell. Do you know what I mean? The fact that it's Piper kind of gives it something else, but that's something else I think is really good. Like, it would have been interesting to see Russell do it, absolutely, because Russell could carry the hair as well. But Piper in this, man, is, again, it works so well because it's cheese. Lack of a better word. Yeah, it's cheese, and Piper seems to deliver the cheese so well.
It is, and it's one of the things, like we talked earlier in the film about, you have these kind of two diametrically opposed kind of notions running at the same time, where you have the social commentary and then you've got the big aliens kind of, the shootouts and everything. And often it feels kind of slightly clumsily put together. But the one thing that runs consistently all the way through this film is this undercurrent of humor. And it's never quite reaches the surface. Outside the zingers, which feels very 80s, it's always kind of darkly comedic, but without ever shouting about it. And so much of that comes from the fact that it has Roddy Piper in the lead. And I think because Kurt Russell is so inherently cool and iconic, in a completely different way, by the way, I'm not sure if it would necessarily work. And I think you might lose that kind of undercurrent of comedy that runs so successfully through the film.
That's what I'm saying. It'd be a completely different film if he was in it.
Well, that's the main thing I think you would lose is that undercurrent of comedy might kind of get lost amidst the bombast and just the inherent coolness of 1980s Kurt Russell.
You say that, Mike, but the comedy is kind of delivered in Big Trouble, isn't it? And Kurt Russell kind of
but it's so much more overt in that. Like, he's like the joke there is that Kurt Russell looks like the perfect action star.
Yeah,
but he's a bumbling idiot. Yeah. But in this, it's never that overt. It's always under the surface. And of course, it's never at the expense of Roddy Piper, because he is very capable throughout the film. But because it's Roddy Piper, because he looks vaguely ridiculous with the hair and the fact that he's just so fucking big, it just adds that sense of like otherworldliness, which is never, as I said, on the surface. It just kind of runs underneath. But as I said, it's just... You could always make the argument this film could be made better with Kurt Russell, but you could literally be talking about any movie with Kurt Russell, especially 1980s Kurt Russell. But I with this film, 9 times out of 10, if you're like, would you like to see this actor replaced by 1980s Kurt Russell? Yes, sir, I would. In this instance, I'm happy to stick with the cards I've got and stick with Roddy Piper.
That was facts, though, mate. So let's move on to soundtrack.
Well, the score, we'll go through it very briefly because, we've already mentioned, especially the main theme, which runs through this film pretty consistently, which, I do feel does quite a bit of the heavy lifting for the characterization of Nada in particular. But it's done by John Carpenter. It's, Alan Howarth, I think he's worked with a number of times. So we won't go into too much detail there. I just think it's a fantastic soundtrack and it fits the tone. Again, hinting at that comedy underneath. That's the main thing about it. Like, the score doesn't just sound cool. It's a narrative device. Before you even see him, you hear the music, you're like, oh, I get that this is supposed to have Western overtones. I get that he's a drifter. You don't have to tell me he's a drifter. It comes through in the music. I can tell the fact that this film isn't taking itself quite as seriously as it could be. Again, it comes from the score. So John Carpenter, who's done a number of fantastic scores for his own film, this will never be his most famous. Obviously you think of Halloween is probably the most iconic. But again, like this film itself, it's just outside that top tier, but it's still fantastic all the same. In terms of legacy, I mean, there was no sequel. There was no real follow-up for Roddy Piper except for Frogtown, which we've mentioned already. Sorry, I can't speak. I guess it's seen as lesser Carpenter. It's just, as good as this film is, if somebody mentions John Carpenter, or God forbid, if you went onto IMDb and usually they show you 4 films associated with the director, this film's probably going to be like 6th on the list.
Yeah.
It's never quite on that list. It's like, and of course that's the victim of John Carpenter's own success. It's Halloween, it's The Thing, whatever, Escape from New York. I got it right this time. So it is lesser Carpenter. And again, I think it's interesting, that the one thing that's come from this film, which has remained, is the imagery. As we said, you do see T-shirts or you see posters with the obey thing and stuff. But it's interesting that I think most people don't associate it with this film. I don't think the film has come with the imagery, if you know what I mean. Like most people, they'd be like, oh, that's like from that film. Whereas now they're just like, well, they've seen the imagery a million times, but they don't necessarily know what it comes from. Like I could speak to most of my friends who, again, if we're talking to my friends who aren't as into films, who haven't seen, for instance, Hell Comes to Frogtown, I could say, even if they haven't seen Big Trouble or if they haven't seen The Thing, they've heard of them. Of course, they've heard of Halloween. I don't think all my friends would have necessarily even heard of They Live. No, I think it's in that weird space in between.
The imagery has definitely surpassed what the film has shown in regards to that. So absolutely, like this, the film has kind of fallen in. It's one of the epitomes of cult classic.
Like, no, it really is. It really is.
Yeah, like you need to know about this film. Like you're not just gonna. I don't think there's not many people who are gonna stumble onto this film. Do you know what I mean?
No, and it's like that cult classic thing is like not as many people have seen it, but the people who have seen it love this film.
Yeah,
like,
bonsai all over it.
Yeah, well, it is a tough sell because it is so 80s and it's so high concept and a bizarre film. But don't get me wrong. It's not the same as, again, Buckaroo Banzai, something like that, because you watch that and you're like, well, you really have to be a genre fan to enjoy this. This works more as a mainstream film, as weird as it is.
Yeah.
I feel like, if I got one of my friends to watch it, they could still potentially enjoy it. It's not that obscure. It's not that it's strange, but it's still very watchable. Structurally, you can still kind of go on the journey and you don't have to kind of connect with the social commentary if you don't want to. You can just watch it as Roddy Piper shooting up aliens, and that's absolutely fine. Or there is the other argument that you could watch it as depressing indictment of the world we live in. When you look at this film, militarized police, drones, misinformation, fake news, all of it's in this film, and all of it is very much in the world we live in right now. So that's probably the most depressing element of its legacy. It's lived on in the worst possible way, because the dystopian future of this film is the future that we live in now, short of maybe not so many mullets and I don't know.
Of all the things I'd want from this film, I'd want a mullet back, I think.
Oh yeah, well yeah, I'll take that over drones and militarized police, I suppose.
So should we score it?
Well, the only other thing is video game.
Oh, video game. Sorry, yeah.
So, no, very quick, because there wasn't a video game. There was a rescinded 8-bit game, but there's never been a video game based on this. And it's strange because it feels like a really missed opportunity. And in terms of what I guess the only thing I can go to is what I'd want to see out of a video game based on They Live in 2022. And it's strange because I've never been into the technology, but the perfect fit for this film feels like a first-person VR, 100%, 100%. You could put the glasses on you pull them up and put them on and the world changes, but you could kind of manage it as in the kind of rules of this world. Like you need to manage your usage or you start becoming delirious or you get a headache, and you can see that on screen. You can imagine that in VR being rather intense. But you could have a part first-person shooter, part like an investigation game. Like the puzzles, you kind of solve them by using the glasses. You could even have it as like part of the game, like halfway through you lose the glasses and then you subsequently don't know who to trust. So, and then you lose points for accidentally killing real humans, but that becomes part of the thing. And then later you get the glasses and back. And I was thinking about who I'd want to make it. And I mean, the only one who jumped to mind is Capcom. And this is largely because while I have no interest in VR, generally speaking, I saw a clip of Resident Evil 4 in VR made by Capcom, and it looks unbelievable. What you can do with the guns and stuff and the movement. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, that's the first game in VR which I've looked at. I thought and Resident Evil 4 just happens to be one of my favorite games of all time. So yeah, Capcom making a VR They Live game. That's the future for me for sure.
So I went that route, but also same but different. So not so much VR. I would have her as a mobile game augmented reality.
Oh, that's a good shout. That is
a.
No, yours is better.
Obviously, with augmented reality, it's the camera takes the world around you, but then it adds like zombies or things like this.
So you're holding up the phone. It's like
you hold up the phone, and then you hold it up onto a billboard, and the billboard says "obey" or something, and then it could highlight on some people around you, and it'll show some of them as ghouls, some of them as normal. Do you know what I mean? I think...
Dude, that is such a great... That's one of those
ones... It puts you into it then, doesn't it? Like,
why didn't I have that idea? That is to the point where, like, man, if someone's listening to this and they're the right person listening to, like, the right podcast, like, there is an idea there. Like, even... They Live maybe isn't the most kind of commercial IP in 2022, but that fucking idea is. That is such a good idea.
Because everyone has this technology. You can take this away with you now, and you can be into They Live. And it's your version of the sunglasses. It's the 2022 version of the sunglasses. Yeah. So for me, it was augmented.
And the thing is, they could even play like you could do it on a global level. Like if they had, face recognition technology, which is pretty prevalent nowadays with mobile phones and stuff.
Yeah.
The developers could make certain celebrities ghouls and stuff like that. Like they could handpick them. Oh, dude, that would be such a good idea. Such a good idea. Okay, so we've got to move on from that fantastic idea. If I had the technology to back it up, we should do it ourselves. I'd steal your idea myself. I'm saying, but in terms of scoring and recommendations, I think this is a 4-star film. I really enjoyed this film. It's not top tier Carpenter, and when I'm saying top tier, we are talking kind of the rarefied air of
The Thing, Big Trouble,
Big Trouble, and Halloween and stuff. But it's right there. It's super fun. I'm going to stick with 4. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to all my friends. I'm not sure if it's necessarily for everyone. I'm not saying it's a tough sell, but it's very much of its time. I don't think I'm going to rush out and tell all my friends to watch this film, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it all the same.
So I'll go in reverse. I wouldn't recommend it due to that same fact. It's not something you can rush out and just turn around to people and say, "Oh, look, you need to watch this film." It's something you need people.
This 80s sci-fi consumerism, social commentary starring Roddy Piper. Like as I'm saying it, I'm like, people are just going, "What the fuck are you talking? This doesn't sound like a real film."
It's a rare film where people need to find this film on their own. People need to find this film, and I think that's what you did it, mind, because I haven't recommended this film yet. You found this film, you recommended it.
Yeah, but I mean, let's be honest, I should have found this film years ago. I'm a Carpenter fan. Look, I'm a genre fan.
I'm a little bit disappointed it's taken you till your 40s to watch it.
Yeah, but I mean, if you would suggest, I mean, you probably assumed I had seen it. In fairness,
I would have thought. I would put money on it.
But that's the thing. Like, if we had a conversation about this film, and it's bizarre that we haven't. And I mentioned it, surely you would have said, you haven't seen that, you'd be surprised, you'd tell me to go and see it. And I assume you'd have confidence that I would enjoy this film, which obviously I did. And it would be the same vice versa. Like if you hadn't seen it, I'd be like, oh, dude, you should totally watch this. It'd be your kind of film. But to your average kind of schmo, average schmo, that sounds so fucking douchey. You know what I mean? In terms of movie watching, like somebody who doesn't necessarily watch all the genre films and stuff, there are a lot of other Carpenter films I would point them in the direction of before this film. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying, as I said, if they came to me and said I was thinking about watching it, I wouldn't kind of talk them out of it. I'd be like, yeah, give it a shot. But I wouldn't just kind of out of the blue say, oh, you haven't seen They Live, you have to see They Live. Whereas, The Thing, I'm like, dude, you've got to see The Thing. That film is fantastic. But yeah, it's again, keep coming back to the idea. If it sits just outside that top tier Carpenter, it's a little bit more, it's a slightly harder sell, but it's still a great film. Especially if you're a genre fan.
Yeah, I'd score it.
I assume you are if you listen to this fucking podcast.
I'd score it as a 4 as well. I think it does so well. I think everything about this film just kind of works. Even the parts that shouldn't work. Yeah. I think it all just does really well. I think it delivers on what it wants to do. Even the rushed ending, I think, is planned. I think it's all just done. It's done so well, and it's just it's a sense of fun. It's something that is relatively scary, especially this day and age. It's delivered with a sense of fun and, well, at this point, nostalgia as well. Just it's good. Yeah,
it's weird, isn't it? Because obviously the social commentary is unsubtle, but it never feels like you're being told off because it never comes at the cost of excitement and, as you say, of fun, of it being an enjoyable ride. It's like, you can read into that, and it's not hard to read into it, but it doesn't kind of like you're a dick for this. You know, this is your fault kind of thing. It's just like, well, this is the world we live in. Oh, look, Alien Shotgun, Roddy Piper. So yeah, it's a super fun film, I want to say. But yeah, so that's been John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi classic, They Live. 4 stars. Go and watch it. What about next week? It is your choice. Yeah.
It's my choice, yes.
Yeah,
right.
So what are we going for, man?
So I need to take you down memory lane a little bit, right?
Oh, here we go. Story time with Rob.
Story time with Rob. I found this on Prime, so I got a little bit excited. We've mentioned this a couple of times. I seem to have a Mount Rushmore of that I want to be made as a T-shirt of what you consider terrible characters in a film.
I mean, yeah, that Mount Rushmore is getting very full.
So
we're gonna have to put fucking Will Smith on it now. Jesus Christ!
No, because Will Smith was never, because I liked the characters. I never liked Will Smith on there. So
I mean, you were right. I spent a whole. I mean, fair play to you for not bringing that up. I spent the entirety of the Independence Day podcast ragging on you for not liking Will Smith, and it turns out he's a complete bellend. You were right again.
Yeah, I know, John. I don't.
It's just going to be a Mount Rushmore of annoying characters with a slogan above it. Liam was wrong, and I'm like, yeah, I am. Every time I'm convinced the world's going to be on my side, it's not.
Yeah. And if the world ends up being on your side, karma seems to take a little thing and make that person just show that he's a dick.
Honestly, right, jokes aside, I think a week ago, the world wouldn't have been on my side with Will Smith. But yeah, that's completely changed now. Yeah. I was like, no, that Will Smith's a dick. And then you look at his family and the fact that he was after the Oscars, like dancing to his own music. You're like, oh, Will, what are you doing, buddy? You're fucking slaying me. So sorry.
That's all right. So currently, my Mount Rushmore is Gutter Boy from The Wraith.
The Wraith, yeah.
Cup from Transformers the movie.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Bobcat Goldthwait. I can't remember his name. Elliot from Scrooged, right?
Yeah.
So there's one missing. And I mean, this might get replaced, but on a T-shirt, I would love to see these 4 characters as a Mount Rushmore, right? The 4th one might have to be Fisher Stevens' character from Super Mario Brothers, the movie.
Oh my God. Do you know what the crazy thing is now? Because we've got Darry Fletcher, like a fantastic artist who's done some genuinely amazing artwork for us recently. If you haven't checked it out, it's worth, it is. Interested in the podcast.
I mean, even his
look at the artwork he's doing.
Even his what ifs of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Alligators, Teenage Mutant Ninja Goldfish. They're fantastic. They are so good.
Like, legitimately, when I say I would frame those pictures, I'm going to frame those pictures.
They are getting framed in my office.
Yeah, he's done great stuff for the They Live podcast, like across the board. We're talking a very talented guy, and I'm a little concerned at some point he's going to take it to heart what you're saying.
Oh, Darry, if you're listening to this, or if I might just have to drop you a private message. I want my Mount Rushmore.
It's so obscure, dude. It's so obscure. The characters you're picking, Gutter Boy from The Wraith. I mean, if you ever want to speak to the kind of ridiculous credentials of this podcast, it's the concept of that Mount Rushmore.
Yeah,
it's the fact that you're willfully like, no, I'm not gonna have Will Smith. That's too on the fucking nose. Yeah. I'm gonna have somebody from fucking Super Mario Boys.
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers.
The only reason I want to watch it is to make sure that I am right in putting Fisher Stevens, because I've only ever seen Mario Brothers once, right?
I've only seen it once.
Mario Brothers was my first foray into being disappointed from video game to film.
Oh yeah. That's. I mean, Jesus Christ, it was probably the good place to start because it's been pretty consistent. I mean,
that's
the best example is probably Sonic the Hedgehog, which is a perfectly serviceable 3-star film. That is the actual Mount Rushmore of video games. It's just a disappointing Sonic where you're just like, that film was okay. That's the best we've got. Although it's getting better on TV. Like, sorry, this is a random one, but if you want an example, because obviously we are going to do Super Mario Brothers, and I am going to let Rob talk in a second, but watch the goddamn Castlevania show on Netflix.
Oh my God.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably good. I think it's the penultimate episode of season 4, and that's the end of the show, is one of the greatest episodes of TV I've ever seen. I know that sounds like a hyperbole, but I was talking to my friend about it. It's like that, and I'm not sure if you ever watched Twin Peaks.
Yeah, Twin Peaks. Yeah,
Twin Peaks season 3 is an absolute mess of a TV show, but there are moments of utter brilliance. And I think it's episode 7 or 8 of season 3 in particular is pure unfettered David Lynch, and it might be the greatest like hour of TV I've ever seen in my life. It's insane, but it's just unbelievable. And I was like, I'm comparing an episode of Castlevania to that. Completely different, but I was sitting there, I was like, this is so good. This is unbelievably good. So I just wanted to point out that there is a positive side to video game adaptations, but anyway, all on TV. And they're definitely not Super Mario Brothers, the movie.
I'm not expecting us to come into next week's episode and go, you know what? This film's fantastic. Yeah.
Imagine we did. Imagine this time. Imagine
we're going
ages.
Well, I say we. I'm going into this film to remember if Fisher Stevens belongs on my Mount Rushmore.
That's a great excuse. And do you know what? I feel like you need that driving narrative to kind of get you through the film. Like you need a reason to watch it. But what I will say is this film is such a mess, and everybody knows Super Mario Brothers, the game. Everyone knows the imagery. This is not that. I mean, on paper, if someone said, "Oh, there's a 1990 Super Mario Brothers film made with Bob Hoskins as the titular Mario," you're like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, that is fantastic casting." It's like Bob Hoskins, like that's the one thing, if nothing else. You're like, well, that sounds like perfect casting.
It's quite better than Chris Pratt at the moment, isn't it?
It's different, yeah, sure. But the film itself, it's an abomination, but it's on the level where I would, again, I've not seen it since the 90s, but to my mind, I'm actually looking forward to revisiting this because I remember it being such a mess, but such a big budget mess. Like I've always had a level of interest in these big budget fiascos where you have so much money, so much talent involved, and yet you still end up with such a turd. It's why I watched, I had to watch 20 minutes of Gods of Egypt. I had to watch at least 30 minutes of Cats. I had to see how all that money and all that talent could end up with this.
I haven't seen Cats, but I watched the whole of Gods of Egypt.
Wow. I was curiosity got the better of me, and I watched 20, 30 minutes. I was like, yep, I get it. That's plenty. The fact that you powered through, that's a heroic effort. But we are going to power through Super Mario Brothers.
We'll get it done.
But it's on Amazon. So if you've got Amazon Prime, it's free to watch as part of your subscription. I'm not going to tell you have to watch the whole film, but for the love of God, watch at least 20 minutes of it because it is fucking insane.
Just back me up on this one. Just watch Fisher Stevens' parts. Does he belong on my Mount Rushmore? Does he belong Does he belong with Gutter Boy? Does he belong with Cup? And does he belong with Bobcat Goldthwait?
There we go. You're building a narrative for everyone. Like even I'm convinced now. Like I've got to see it. Is he that bad? Is he the worst thing in this truly terrible film? We'll find out next week. So yes, please do join us for Super Mario. Oh my God, next week. And as we're going from They Live to Super Mario Brothers. It's fucking insane. It's like we don't want listeners. It's fucking we're out of our minds. But yeah, as always, thanks for making it this far. Really this week. And join us next week, Super Mario Brothers. Cheers, Rob. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.